All right, so are you ready to have your mind blown today?
Always up for a good mental workout.
Excellent. Well, today we're going deep, deep into Nassim Nicholas Taleb's The Black Swan.
Ooh, a classic.
Right. It's a book that really makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world, especially all those massive, unpredictable events that seem to come out of nowhere and just change everything.
The things that nobody sees coming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you'll send in some truly thought-provoking excerpts for this deep dive.
I can't wait to dig in.
So should we just jump right in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So I was really struck by how Taleb sets the stage in those early chapters. He starts by, defining what a black swan event actually is. It's unpredictable,
Obviously.
high impact,
For sure.
and only obvious in hindsight.
Right, you can only really connect the dots looking back.
Yeah, it's like think about the rise of Google, right?
From a garage to a global giant.
Yeah, nobody could have predicted that.
Totally. And then on the flip side, you have something like 9/11.
Tragic. And it really exposed just how vulnerable we are to these unforeseen events.
Totally. Both of those events, in their own way, completely changed the course of history.
Absolutely. But I'm curious, how does Taleb actually connect those specific examples, like Google and 9/11, to the broader ideas he's exploring in the book?
Well, that's where his whole distinction between mediocristan and extremistan comes in.
Okay, yeah, those are some interesting terms.
Right. He really fleshes this out in chapters 2, 3, and even later in chapter 14. So mediocristan, that's where things tend to average out.
Okay, like your classic bell curve stuff.
Exactly. Think like height or weight. The surprises are small. You
Yeah.
can kind of rely on past data to get a sense of what's coming.
Okay, so like the predictable world, the stuff where you can look back and be like, yeah, this is probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. But then he throws us into extremistan. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So extremistan, this is the world of book sales.
Okay.
Wealth distribution, pandemics, you name it.
Wow, so really high stakes stuff.
Exactly. And in extremistan, those rare events, the black swans, they can just completely dominate the outcome.
Like one single event can just change everything.
Yeah. And what's really kind of unsettling is that Taleb argues that our modern world, it's shifting more and more into extremistan.
So we're moving away from the predictable and more into this world of unknowns.
Precisely.
So the more complex things become, the harder it is to predict the future.
And the more likely we are to be blindsided.
Yeah, that's a bit scary if you think about it.
It is, and it really challenges one of the fundamental ways we think. The problem of induction.
Okay, the problem of induction. Break that down for me.
So it's something he digs into in chapters 4, 5, and 10. It's basically this idea that we tend to assume just because something happened in the past, it will continue to happen in the future.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, history repeats itself.
Right. But Taleb is saying, not so fast.
Okay, I'm listening.
He uses this brilliant analogy. He calls it the turkey problem.
Okay, a turkey problem. That sounds interesting.
So imagine a turkey, right? And he's being fed every single day for like 1,000 days.
Living the good life.
Exactly. It starts to feel really secure, comfortable, like this is how it's always going to be.
Like, life is good. This is the way things are. I've got to figure it out.
Exactly. But then Thanksgiving comes along.
Oh, no.
And suddenly, that turkey's entire understanding of the world is just shattered.
Poof. Gone.
Exactly. So it's like a black swan event for that turkey.
Yeah, totally get the analogy. But I'm curious, how does this apply to, say, someone listening to this right now?
Well, think about it. Are there areas in your work or your life where you're relying on past trends?
Past data.
Yeah, stuff that might not actually hold true anymore. Maybe it's the way you've always marketed your products or the assumptions you make about customer behavior.
I see.
What if there's a Thanksgiving event lurking just around the corner ready to just disrupt everything?
Whoa. That's a really powerful point. I mean, so Taleb is basically saying we need to be questioning our assumptions, even the ones that seem rock solid based on our past experience.
Precisely. And this actually ties directly into another fascinating concept that he introduces in chapters 6 and 7, the narrative fallacy.
Okay, the narrative fallacy. Tell me more.
So it's not that stories are bad, but we have this deep-seated human need to create narratives to explain things.
We love a good story.
Right, even when those narratives are oversimplified or just plain wrong.
So it's like we're trying to force fit the world into a story that makes sense to us, even if it's not the reality.
Exactly. It makes us think we understand the world better than we actually do.
So like when a major event happens, everyone starts scrambling to piece together the why and the how. even if it's all just speculation.
Exactly. And when it comes to Black Swan events, the narrative fallacy can be especially dangerous.
Because you can't really explain the unexplainable, right?
Right. We try to fit these unpredictable events into a neat, understandable story, even if they defy explanation. It gives us a false sense of control when in reality, we might just be grasping at straws.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. So Taleb is showing us how our brains are kind of wired to seek certainty even where there is none.
Yep.
We rely on past patterns, we create stories, and we just cling to what feels familiar. But he's saying that in a world increasingly dominated by extremistan, that approach can seriously backfire.
Absolutely. And to fully grasp the limitations of our knowledge, he introduces this idea of silent evidence. It's pretty mind-blowing.
Okay, silent evidence. I have no idea what that means.
So think of it this way. Imagine all the things that don't happen,
Okay.
or all the stories that are never told.
Okay, yeah.
We tend to focus on the winners, the survivors, the people who made it through whatever challenges they faced.
Right, like we love those stories.
We do, but what about all the others who took similar risks but didn't make it?
Oh, so it's kind of like survivor bias. We only hear from the people who are lucky enough to come out on top.
Exactly. And it creates this really distorted view of history. We see success and we think, oh, they did X, Y, and Z, so I should too.
Right, it's like a recipe for success.
Right. But we're missing a huge chunk of the story. All the people who did the same things and failed.
Wow, so silent evidence is kind of like the hidden iceberg of history. It's all the stuff that we don't see that could completely change our understanding of how things actually work.
That's a great way to put it. And this is where Taleb's work gets really challenging, because it's not just about accepting that black swans exist. It's about recognizing how our own biases and mental shortcuts can blind us to the possibility of them happening.
Even when the evidence is right there in front of us.
Hidden in plain sight.
Okay, so we've got black swans, mediocristan versus extremistan, the problem of induction, the narrative fallacy, and now silent evidence. That's a lot. All pretty heavy stuff. Before we move on, is there anything else from these early chapters that we need to kind of grasp before we jump into the rest?
Yeah, there is one more concept that's closely tied to the narrative fallacy.
Okay.
He explores it in chapters 9 and 16. It's the ludic fallacy.
The ludic fallacy. That sounds interesting.
It is. It's basically where we try to apply the rules of games to real life.
Okay.
Assuming that, just because something works in a controlled environment like a game, it will work in the messy, unpredictable real world.
So it's like taking a very simplified view of reality.
Yeah, Taleb uses casinos as a great example.
Casinos, okay.
They can predict their profits from roulette because over time, the odds are in their favor, right?
Yeah.
But real life isn't a roulette wheel.
Definitely not.
And that's the ludic fallacy in action. We might think we've got things figured out, we can calculate our way to success, but real life is full of black swans.
That just completely defy those neat calculations.
Exactly. So relying too heavily on models and predictions can actually make us more vulnerable to those unpredictable events.
It's almost like the more we try to control things, the more likely we are to be caught off guard.
It's a paradox, isn't it? And this leads us to a much bigger question, which is, how much can we actually know? Especially when it comes to complex systems that are constantly evolving and changing.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to hit a moving target in the dark.
That's a great analogy, and that's exactly what Taleb forces us to confront.
I'm ready to be confronted.
Let's do it. That's the million-dollar question, right? And, in chapters 10, 11, and 12, Taleb really digs into this whole idea by tackling the limitations of experts.
Oh, he does not hold back.
Nope, he does not. But I think a lot of us, we have this kind of intuitive sense that experts, especially those with all the fancy degrees and titles, they must know what they're talking about.
Right. It just seems like they would.
Yeah, totally. It's a natural assumption.
Yep.
But Taleb points to some fascinating research, like the Tetlock study. Have you ever heard of that?
Vaguely.
Well, it actually showed that experts are often worse at prediction than chance.
Wait, so you're telling me that just flipping a coin would give me better odds of predicting the future than listening to, like, a hotshot economist or something?
In some cases, yes. And it really comes down to the fact that experts, just like all of us, are susceptible to those cognitive biases.
So they might think they know more than they actually do.
Exactly. They tend to overestimate their own knowledge and then underestimate the role of randomness and uncertainty.
It's like they get so focused on their narrow little area of expertise that they miss the bigger picture, right? All those other factors that could come into play.
Exactly. It's like tunnel vision almost. And this actually ties into another major theme that Taleb explores in chapters 15 15, 16, and 17, it's the bell curve illusion.
Okay, the bell curve illusion. Now I feel like we're getting into some seriously heady territory here.
We are, but it's really fascinating. So the bell curve illusion, this is this idea that we're so conditioned to think that most things in life fall within this neat, predictable, bell-shaped curve.
Right, like your classic bell curve.
Yeah.
Like height or IQ, right? Most people fall somewhere in the middle. There's a few outliers.
Exactly. But Taleb argues that the bell curve, it's a dangerous model to apply to many real-world phenomena, especially in extremistan. So he suggests that things like wealth distribution, book sales, or even the impact of technological innovations, they often follow what are called power laws or fractal patterns.
Okay, I have to admit, when you start talking about power laws and fractal patterns, my brain starts to melt a little bit.
I feel you. But think about, let's say, the music industry. So you have a handful of megastars who generate the majority of the revenue.
Right.
But then you have thousands of incredibly talented musicians who are struggling to even make ends meet.
Yeah, that's a good example.
That's a power law in action. A very small number of events have this disproportionate impact on the whole system.
So it's not this nice, even distribution. It's more like a steep mountain with a few towering peaks and then a long, long tail.
Exactly. And then fractal patterns, they're kind of similar. They have this really cool property called self-similarity.
Self-similarity.
Yeah, it basically means that they look very similar at different scales. So imagine a coastline. Up close, it's all jagged and rough, right? But then if you zoom out and look at it from a distance, it's still jagged and rough, just at a different scale.
I see. Okay, so how do these patterns, power laws, and fractals, how do they connect to this whole idea of Black Swan events?
Well, with power laws and fractals, those extreme events are way more common than the bell curve would suggest. So in a way, black swans are kind of baked into the structure of these systems.
Oh, interesting.
They're not just random anomalies, they're part of how things actually work.
I see. So it's like if you're looking at something like the stock market and you're thinking that everything's nice and evenly distributed, like a bell curve, you're setting yourself up for a big surprise.
Exactly. And that can lead to some really nasty surprises, especially in extremistan. What's really important to understand is that Taleb is not saying we should just give up and just throw our hands up and say, well, we can't know anything.
So what's the alternative? How do we navigate this world where we can't rely on experts or these predictions, or even the bell curve for that matter?
Well, that's where his concept of skeptical empiricism comes in. He actually talks about this throughout the book, but especially in chapters 13, 18, and in the conclusion.
Okay, skeptical empiricism, that's something you've mentioned a couple of times.
Yeah.
How do we put this into practice? What does it actually look like to be a skeptical empiricist?
Well, it starts with acknowledging what we don't know, right?
Embracing the unknown.
Exactly. It's about understanding that our knowledge is always incomplete and there's always more to learn.
So being humble, not getting too attached to our own beliefs and theories.
Precisely. And it also means being constantly on the lookout for evidence that challenges our assumptions.
Oh, interesting.
Actively seeking out those dissenting opinions. Being willing to even be proven wrong.
So it's almost like a scientific mindset, right?
Yeah.
But applied to everyday life. It's like constantly testing your hypotheses, being open to new information, revising your beliefs as you go.
That's a great way to put it. And I think this is where Taleb's work gets really empowering, because it's not just about being skeptical of everything. It's about being curious, open-minded, and constantly learning from experience.
And maybe even a little bit excited by the fact that we don't have all the answers, right?
Exactly. There's this sense of adventure in embracing the unknown and realizing that the world is far more complex and unpredictable than we could ever fully grasp.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light a little bit here. But I guess, practically speaking, how do we become more like these skeptical empiricists? Are there any specific strategies that we can use?
Yeah, absolutely. So one strategy Taleb suggests is being aware of the confirmation bias.
Oh yeah, that's a classic.
It's that tendency to only seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs.
Right, so a good strategy to combat that would be to actively seek out opposing viewpoints. Right?
Exactly. Read books and articles that challenge your perspective. Talk to people who disagree with you.
Get uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, exposing ourselves to ideas that might make us squirm a bit.
I like it. So what else?
Well, another strategy that he emphasizes is focusing on process over results.
Process over results. Okay. So it's not just about achieving a specific outcome, but it's more about the journey, the steps that we take along the way.
Precisely. And this is especially important in fields that are prone to black swan events. Instead of getting caught up in the highs and the lows, we should focus on building a solid foundation, a consistent approach.
And learning from our mistakes.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Yeah, I love
But
that.
in this case, the journey is about becoming more resilient, more adaptable.
More able to handle those curveballs.
Precisely. And this actually ties into another really key point that Taleb makes, which is don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Oh, the classic diversification advice, right?
Right. Spread that risk. It's pretty standard investment advice.
Right.
But it actually applies to so much more than just our finances. Diversify your skills, your knowledge, your experiences. Don't become overly reliant on any one particular path or outcome.
So if one of your turkeys gets cooked, you've got some other options.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of the most intriguing strategies that Taleb proposes. He calls it the barbell strategy.
The barbell strategy. That sounds like something you'd find more in like a gym than in a finance book.
Well, it's a powerful concept. So imagine a barbell, weights on either end and the bar connecting them.
Got it.
Taleb's idea is to actually apply this to how we approach risk.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how does that work? How do you apply a barbell to your life?
Well, it's about having a combination of extreme risk aversion on the one hand and extreme risk taking on the other.
Okay, that's an interesting combination.
It is. So on one end of the barbell, you have those really safe, secure bets, things that are unlikely to change drastically. So like financially, that might be putting a portion of your money into some low yield but very stable investments.
Yeah, I see.
But then on the other end of the barbell, you have a smaller portion that you dedicate to those high-risk, high-reward ventures.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So things that have the potential for a massive payoff, even though the odds are pretty slim.
Exactly. Like it's almost like playing it safe with most of your chips, but then placing a few on those, long shot numbers on the roulette wheel just to see what happens.
I like it. So it's about kind of balancing stability with speculation in a way.
Exactly. And the key here is that you're protected from a catastrophic loss because most of your resources are in that safe zone.
Right.
But you're also exposed to the possibility of massive gains because you've got a little skin in the game on the riskier side.
I see. And this applies beyond finances as well, right?
Absolutely. Think about your career, for example. So you might have that really stable 9-to-5 job that provides you with security, but you also might dedicate a couple of evenings a week to pursuing that passion project that has the potential to really turn into something big. Or in relationships, you might have your core group of close friends and family who provide that emotional support, but then you also make an effort to meet new people, step outside your comfort zone a little bit.
So it's like applying this principle of diversification, but on a much broader scale.
Exactly. And the barbell strategy, I think, it's really a way of embracing both the known and the unknown, the predictable and the unpredictable.
That's a great way to think about it. But,
Yeah.
with all this talk of uncertainty and the limits of our knowledge, I have to ask, doesn't it get a bit depressing?
Yeah, I can see how it might.
Because if we can't really predict anything, what's the point of even trying to plan or set goals or anything?
That's a great question, and I think this is where Taleb's message is often misunderstood. He's not saying that we should just give up and let fate take over. He's saying that we need to shift our mindset from one of trying to control everything to one of adapting and being flexible.
So it's not about eliminating uncertainty, it's more about embracing it.
Exactly. And I think that's really where the excitement lies, because when we let go of the illusion of control, we open ourselves up to those new possibilities, to those serendipitous encounters, to those unexpected breakthroughs that we could never have planned for.
So it's like turning that fear of the unknown into a sense of adventure and possibility.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes life so fascinating. We're constantly evolving, learning, adapting to a world that's always changing around us. We're not static beings. It's about seeing that uncertainty not as something to fear, but as a source of opportunity.
I love that, turning that fear into excitement.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways from the Black Swan. It's not just, some doom and gloom prophecy about the world falling apart, right? It's more like a call to action.
It's an invitation to wake up.
Yeah, become more aware, more adaptable, more resilient.
So to wrap things up here, what are some of the key things that listeners can do to apply Taleb's ideas to their own lives? Because I feel like we've covered so much ground here.
We have, from the nature of black swans to, all the ways our thinking can kind of trip us up.
Yeah.
But I think the first step is cultivating that skeptical empiricism we talked about, just being curious.
Question your assumptions.
Yeah, seek out information that challenges those deeply held beliefs.
And be open to being wrong.
Oh, absolutely, because that's how we learn and grow.
It's true.
Another key point is to focus on what you can't control.
Okay.
Don't waste energy trying to predict every possible scenario.
Right.
Or eliminate all risk, because that's just not possible.
Yeah, so fool's errand.
It is. Instead, focus on building systems and habits that are robust, flexible, that can withstand those unexpected shocks.
So like having backup plans, diversifying our skills, maybe diversifying our investments, just being prepared for more possibilities.
Precisely. And don't forget the power of serendipity.
Right. Yes. Serendipity.
Yeah.
The good kind of surprise.
Exactly. Sometimes the greatest opportunities come from those unexpected detours, those chance encounters, those moments when life throws a curveball and you just have to roll with it.
It's like trusting that the universe has a plan, even if it's not the plan that you initially had in mind.
Exactly. It's not about, everything going according to plan. It's about being open to new experiences, being willing to step outside that comfort zone, and recognizing that sometimes the best things in life happen when we least expect them.
I love that. So it sounds like it's not about just passively accepting whatever fate that throws our way, but being active participants in our own lives.
Yes, shaping our destinies, right. Through this combination of, careful planning, calculated risk-taking, and then just that willingness to embrace the unknown.
Beautiful. So if we can't truly predict the future, does that mean we have less control over our lives? Or does it mean that we actually have more freedom to shape our own destinies?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is, and I think that's a perfect note to end on, something to ponder. Till our next deep dive.